We have already met Hamlet, surrounded by courtly words, advice, and restraint. What will happen once he steps out of that controlled space into darkness? Today, we will see that how tragedy begins not with just what has happened in your past, but by the choices you decide to make to change your future. Or do you think your choices have any actual consequence? So let me take you back to that midnight platform where Hamlet finally gets to see the ghost of his father in Act 1, Scene 4. The first words that we hear from Hamlet: "The air bites shrewdly, it is very cold." Of course, the air is not biting him in that sense, but the personification adds to the eeriness. It's a nipping and an eager air, so it's biting eagerly. What hour now? I think it lacks of 12. So Hamlet is on this platform with Horatio and Marcellus, and we know that the ghost appears at 12 o'clock. So when Horatio says, I think it lacks of 12, it means it is not yet 12. No, it is struck. So there is some little uncertainty about the exactness of the time here. Indeed, I heard it not. Then it draws near the season wherein the spirit held his wont to walk. So this is the moment when the ghost usually appears, right after 12 o'clock. And just when we are waiting for the ghost to enter, suddenly we hear a flourish of trumpet. It's like some sound of a party going on somewhere, and an ordnance is shot off. So there's some shots fired. So when you're reading the play, it might not come as a jump scare moment, but when you're looking on the stage, expecting the ghost to arrive, and suddenly you hear a shot, so you feel scared. So this is how the performance makes the audience already feel jittery about the whole thing. But why is that shot at all fired? What does this mean, my lord? The king doth wake tonight and takes his rouse. So king is having a party today. Loud drinking celebration. Keeps wassail and the swaggering upspring reels, and as he drains his draughts of Rhenish down, so the while dancing is going about and he is going on drinking cups of Rhine wine. The kettle drum and trumpet does bray out the triumph of his pledge. So it's like he is having victory in drinking. And the kettle drum and trumpet and probably that odd shot in the air is announcing every time he is finishing a cup. All right. So you see, when usually you have flourish of trumpets, ordnances shot off, it's for a real victory that a king has or some political feat achieved. But here, the whole royal setup is proclaiming a drinking spree of the king. So it's like a moral deterioration has taken place. But interestingly, this is not something that is being done only for Claudius. This has been a tradition actually. Is it a custom? I'm merry as it. But to my mind, though I am native here, and to the manner born, it is a custom more honored in the breach than the observance. So it is a custom which is, it's better not to follow it because it reduces the value, the prestige of this nation in the eyes of the foreign countries. This heavy-headed revel, east and west, makes us traduced and taxed of other nations. They clip us drunkards, so people call us drunkards. So it's against Danish reputation. And with swinish phrase, soil our addition. No matter what we achieve, we are only given insults using animal-like language. And indeed, it takes from our achievements, though performed at height, the pith and marrow of our attribute. So this is how we are failing to generate in our neighbors any kind of admiration for our achievements. So this is not something Hamlet approves of. So oft it chances in particular men. And then Hamlet, he was talking about the political scenario, that Denmark is otherwise a very great state, but because of this custom where the king has this wine party and it's like a celebration of being drunk, that Denmark is losing its value in the eyes of others. Similarly, he takes the whole thing to a personal level now, that even in individuals, no matter how great they are otherwise, a small little folly can tarnish his whole reputation. That for some vicious mole of nature in them, even in human beings, when there is a small defect, one moral flaw, as in their birth, wherein they are not guilty, since nature cannot choose his origin, by the overgrowth of some complexion, oft breaking down the pales and forts of reason. Sometimes maybe the person is born with that kind of a defect, but it grows over time. Or by some habit that too much overleavens the form of plausive manners. So something that is caused by temperament or by a habit that overwhelms good sense, social manners. If something happens to a person, if some flaw is there, carrying, I say, the stamp of one defect, being nature's livery or fortune star, their virtues else, be they as pure as grace, maybe otherwise they are great people, but they have one defect, as infinite as man may undergo, shall in the general censure, generally even then, like people normally, what would they do? Corruption from that particular fault. People will find fault with him just because of that one defect. The dram of eel doth all the noble substance of a doubt to his own scandal. A very small fault can damage an otherwise good reputation. So this is how Hamlet is talking about the case of an individual while talking about the case of a nation too. Look, my lord, it comes, and then suddenly the ghost appears. Angels and ministers of grace defend us. He is scared. Be thou a spirit of health or goblin damned. Spirit of health means something positive. Goblin damned is like he doesn't know what kind of spirit has just arrived. So we see Hamlet still trying to apply reason, logic, question the validity, the reality of the ghost in front of him, the true nature of the ghost in front of him. Bring with thee airs from heaven or blast from hell. So now he wants to classify what kind of ghost has come. True ghost, false ghost. Be thy intents wicked or charitable? Are you here because you want to do harm or to do good? Thou comest in such a questionable shape that I will speak to thee. I have to talk to you to understand why you have come. I'll call thee Hamlet. Now he's not first addressing the ghost as father, although he uses the word father in the next sentence. King, father, royal Dane, oh answer me. Why does he use so many words? Hamlet, king, father, royal Dane. Because he doesn't know which form of address is the ghost ready to accept. He's not sure, but he wants the ghost to respond. So it doesn't matter to him if the ghost responds to father, to king, to any other address. He wants to try every alternative. He is so much bent on speaking to the ghost. Oh, answer me. Let me not burst in ignorance. Usually people burst with something. Ignorance is like absence of knowledge. You cannot burst with absence, but this is again playing with words here. But tell why thy canonized bones. We know that King Hamlet had been buried with all proper rituals. Usually we have this idea that if somebody doesn't have all his rituals done properly, then they come out of their dead. This is usually the general superstition. So Hamlet is trying to reason out that we have followed every ritual while burying you. So why have you come out? That means there is something else going on. So he says, thy canonized bones, hearsed in death, have burst their cerements. Cerements means those wax wrappings, the shrouds in which the body is wrapped before burial. So the ghost must have burst through those garments and come out. Why the sepulchre, wherein we saw thee quietly inured, you were entombed in that vault, hath opened his ponderous and marble jaws. So it's like another personification is done here. Ponderous means heavy. The vault in which the king was buried, that vault is made of marble. So when that ghost has come out, then has the marble vault opened like it's opening its mouth, its jaws, to cast thee up again? What may this mean, that thou, dead corpse, again in complete steel, in your whole steel uniform, revisitest thus the glimpses of the moon, making night hideous? What may this mean, your appearance in this full uniform, to make this night so horrible? And we, fools of nature, so horridly to shake our disposition with thoughts beyond the reaches of our souls. And what we are trying to do is, we're trying to think about things that are beyond our comprehension because of your arrival. Say, why is this? Wherefore? What should we do? The ghost beckons Hamlet. Okay, the ghost is not speaking. We haven't heard the ghost in front of others. This is important. Keep this in mind. Ghost is not speaking when Hamlet is not alone with the ghost. It beckons you to go away with it as if it some impartment did desire to you alone. So Horatio understands that the ghost is not ready to speak in front of them. So he says that he wants to speak to you alone. And of course, they are scared. They don't want Hamlet to go with the ghost just by himself. Look, now this is Marcellus giving him warning. With what courteous action he waves you to a more removed ground. So probably the ghost is giving some signals with his hand, something to call Hamlet to a more removed location away from the other two. But do not go with it. Horatio is also warning. No, by no means. It will not speak. Then I will follow it if I don't go with it. It's not speaking. I have to go. Do not, my lord. Why? What should be the fear? What's the problem if I go? I do not set my life in a pin's fee. I don't give any value to my life. What will happen? I'll die? I don't care. And for my soul, what can it do to that, being a thing immortal as itself? Now the ghost, it's possibly going to harm my body, but it cannot affect my soul because we are equal on the spiritual level. It waves me forth again. I'll follow it. Now Horatio wants to give some logic for his warnings. What if it tempt you toward the flood, my lord, or to the dreadful summit of the cliff? Maybe it'll drag you to the river and you drown. Maybe it'll take you to the top of the cliff and you jump. Normally it was believed that sometimes ghosts take shape of your beloved ones to just mess with your lives and make you do things that you otherwise wouldn't do. So maybe it'll drag you to the end of the cliff that beetles over his base into the sea, and there assume some other horrible form which might deprive your sovereignty of reason. Your sovereignty means your mind. Your mind might be affected and draw you into madness. What if the ghost makes you mad? Think of it. So it's not just bodily harm that Horatio is talking about. He's saying that maybe you will lose your senses if you follow it. What happens then? The very place puts toys of desperation without more motive into every brain that looks so many fathoms to the sea and hears it roar beneath. So if he takes you to that cliff top, which is just above the sea, even under normal circumstances, people feel like full of desperation. So who knows? In these eerie circumstances, if you go to that location, you might automatically be mad. It waves me still. It's still waving. I have to go. Go on, I'll follow thee. You shall not go, my lord. Hold off your hands, which shows that they're trying to hold him back physically. Be ruled, you shall not go. My fate cries out and makes each petty artery in this body as hardy as the Nemean lion's nerve. Still am I called. Unhand me, gentlemen. So they are holding him. He wants to get rid of their hold and rush towards the ghost. By heaven, I will make a ghost of him that lets me. So if you don't leave me right now, I'm going to kill you even. So he really wants to go and follow the ghost. I say, away, go on, I'll follow thee. And he rushes out with the ghost. And Horatio and Marcellus, they are pretty bothered at this moment. He waxes desperate with imagination. Let's follow. It's not fit thus to obey him. So he wants us to be here, but I think we should not follow his orders. We should go because his safety is our priority. Have after. To what issue will this come? Now Horatio is talking about things in general, that what will happen now. And Marcellus gives that very, very important line. Sometimes people, make this mistake. They think that this line is spoken by a major character. But this line, which happens to be one of the most famous lines of Hamlet, often quoted later in different contexts, this line is spoken by Marcellus. Something is rotten in the state of Denmark. Now, Shakespeare did not give this wonderful line to Marcellus just randomly. Possibly he wants us to understand that corruption is not just a private feeling or even a royal secret. It is sensed by ordinary people as well. And the word rotten, it is a very sensory, physical word. It suggests decay, disease, moral spoilage, not just political trouble. And we still do not know what exactly has happened. So there is no evidence in front of us about any wrongdoing. But we have this line which is already talking about Denmark being in a rotten state. So we understand that there is a kind of a premonition in us. We are given a circumstance where expectations are modified. And this comment is linked directly to Hamlet's previous comment on unweeded garden. You remember from scene 2? And both images describe neglect, decay. And then when we see Horatio and Marcellus, they have decided to follow Hamlet so that they can ensure his safety. We see them leaving the stage. Heaven will direct it. Nay, let's follow him. And they leave. We understand that this scene is showing us Hamlet making a choice. What choice? He chooses to follow the ghost. And this is like his first direct step towards danger. The central idea of this scene is more like a conflict between reason and impulse. Horatio, Marcellus, they represent common sense, caution, while Hamlet represents emotion, impulse. And the scene ends with a sense of uncertainty. Hamlet follows the ghost into darkness, leaving safety behind. The scene doesn't close with answers, but with a choice. And that choice carries the weight of everything that follows. What follows? We'll see that in our next video when we look at the 5th scene and the final scene of the first act. Till then, stay subscribed, stay happy. This is Monami Mukherjee signing off. Bye-bye.